Picture this. It's 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday at Sunset Manor Senior Center, and Barbara Kowalski, a 72-year-old woman who still refers to her television remote as the clicker, is accidentally live streaming her first ever smartphone tutorial to 12,000 strangers on TikTok. Welcome to Silver Chuckles, the place where punchlines age like fine wine. If you're here for some laugh-out-loud absurdity wrapped in real-life charm, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. She's wearing a neon pink tracksuit that she bought in 1987 and genuinely believes is making a comeback, while frantically tapping the screen and muttering something about how this contraption has more buttons than Mission Control. Meanwhile, her friend Ed Garrison, 75 and sporting a smartwatch that knows his heart rate better than his cardiologist, is in the background doing what can only be described as interpretive dance to help explain the cloud. The chat is exploding with crying laughing emojis, and Barbara hasn't even figured out how to unmute herself yet. This, my friends, is how the great smartphone rebellion of Sunset Manor began. Not with a bang, but with a bewildered senior citizen asking the internet if anyone knows how to make the tiny people in the phone talk louder. Our story begins 3 weeks earlier, when the Sunset Manor Activities Director, a well-meaning millennial named Ashley who still uses phrases like, "That's so fetch," unironically, announced that smartphone literacy was now mandatory for all residents. The reasoning was simple. Family members were tired of driving over every time Grandma needed to video call, and the staff was exhausted from explaining for the 1,000th time that, no, Mrs. Henderson, you cannot pause live television by yelling at it. Barbara, who had successfully avoided every piece of technology more complex than an electric can opener, found herself face-to-face with her greatest nemesis, a device that apparently contained the entire internet, her grandson's baby photos, and something called Candy Crush that people seemed to find more addictive than afternoon soap operas. Ed, on the other hand, had embraced technology with the fervor of a man who just discovered that his new smartwatch could track everything from his steps to his sleep patterns to what he'd eaten for breakfast, information he was eager to share with anyone within a 50-foot radius, whether they asked or not. The first day of Smartphone 101 arrived with all the fanfare of a root canal appointment. Barbara entered the community room clutching her trusty flip phone, a device so ancient it probably belonged in a museum next to the rotary telephone and the 8-track player. She'd owned this particular flip phone for 12 years, and it had served her well through countless conversations with her sister Dolores about the weather, her nephew's divorce, and whether or not the new mailman was stealing magazines. The phone had exactly 2 functions, making calls and receiving calls, which in Barbara's opinion was 2 more functions than most people needed. Why fix what ain't broken? She'd mutter to anyone who'd listen, conveniently ignoring the fact that her phone's battery lasted about as long as a mayfly's lifespan, and the reception was so poor she often found herself having entire conversations with dial tones. Ed, meanwhile, had arrived 30 minutes early, wearing his new smartwatch like a badge of honor and carrying his smartphone in a leather holster that made him look like he was preparing for a gunfight at the OK Corral. He'd spent the previous evening watching YouTube tutorials on smartphone optimization for seniors and had filled 3 pages of a spiral notebook with terms like swipe, pinch to zoom, and force close, none of which he fully understood but all of which made him feel incredibly sophisticated. His smartwatch had been buzzing constantly since 6 a.m., alerting him to everything from his morning coffee intake to the fact that he'd been standing still for more than an hour. Information that would have been useful if Ed had any intention of doing anything about it. Ashley bounced into the room with a kind of enthusiasm typically reserved for game show hosts and kindergarten teachers, her arms full of charging cables, screen protectors, and what appeared to be enough technological accessories to outfit a small electronics store. "Good morning, digital pioneers," she chirped, apparently oblivious to the fact that most of her audience looked like they were being led to their execution rather than enlightenment. She began her presentation with a PowerPoint slide that contained more animation than a Disney movie, complete with swooshing sounds and text that bounced across the screen like caffeinated kangaroos. Barbara immediately developed a headache that she was certain was caused by either the flashing lights or the sudden realization that she was expected to learn something that required more than pressing 2 buttons. The lesson began simply enough. Everyone was handed a basic smartphone and told to explore the interface. Barbara held her assigned device like it might explode at any moment, occasionally turning it different directions, as if the proper angle might suddenly make everything clear. Ed, meanwhile, had already managed to somehow activate the camera, take 47 accidental photos of his thumb, and set his ringtone to what sounded like a techno remix of Old MacDonald Had a Farm. The woman sitting next to Barbara, a soft-spoken retired librarian named Mildred, had somehow opened an app that was making barnyard noises, and despite Ashley's repeated attempts to help her close it, the room was now filled with the periodic sounds of mooing cows and clucking chickens, which actually seemed to improve the overall atmosphere considerably. 20 minutes into the lesson, disaster struck in the most beautifully absurd way possible. Barbara, who had been squinting at her phone screen and mumbling about how these letters are smaller than ant droppings, accidentally activated something called TikTok Live. She had no idea what TikTok was. She'd heard her granddaughter mention it once in the same breath as something called Instagram and Snapchat, which Barbara assumed were either new breakfast cereals or possibly communicable diseases. What she did know was that suddenly her phone screen was showing her own face, which was both alarming and deeply unflattering, considering she was wearing her reading glasses, which magnified her eyes to approximately the size of dinner plates. "Hello? Hello? Can anyone hear me?" Barbara said loudly into the phone, holding it at arm's length and rotating it like she was trying to tune in a radio station. The viewer count began climbing: 50, 100, 300, 1,000. Comments started flowing in faster than Barbara could blink, filled with crying laughing emojis and messages like, "Grandma is iconic," and "I can't even." Phrases that would have meant absolutely nothing to Barbara, even if she could have read them, which she couldn't, because she was still trying to figure out how to make her own image appear right side up. Ed, who had been busy explaining to Mildred that her phone was not, in fact, broken just because the screen had gone dark when she stopped touching it, suddenly noticed the commotion. His smartwatch, which had apparently appointed itself as his personal technology advisor, buzzed urgently and somehow displayed a notification that Barbara was trending on social media. Now, Ed didn't fully understand what trending meant, but he'd seen enough commercials to know it was probably good, like being popular or having your birthday announced on the morning radio show. "Barb," he shouted across the room, abandoning Mildred to her barnyard symphony, "your phone says you're trending. You're famous." This announcement caused Barbara to panic in the specific way that only septuagenarians can panic when faced with unexpected attention. She began gesticulating wildly at the phone, which the TikTok audience interpreted as some sort of performance art. "I don't want to be trending. I don't even know what that means. How do I make it stop trending?" "Ed, your fancy watch is broken. I'm not famous. I'm just confused." The more she protested, the more the viewer count climbed. Someone in the chat started a hashtag #ConfusedGrandma, and within minutes, Barbara's live stream had been shared across multiple platforms by people who found her authentic bewilderment absolutely delightful. Ashley, who had been helping another resident figure out how to answer a phone call without hanging up on the caller, suddenly realized that her carefully planned lesson had devolved into what appeared to be an impromptu social media sensation. "Oh my gosh, Barbara, you're live on TikTok. You have 15,000 viewers," she exclaimed, which was exactly the wrong thing to say to someone who still considered it an invasion of privacy when the grocery store cashier asked for her phone number. Barbara's eyes went wide behind her magnifying reading glasses, making her look like a startled owl who had just discovered that the entire forest was watching her hunt for mice. 15,000 what now?" Barbara demanded, still holding the phone at various angles as if the proper position might make the situation less terrifying. "Are they my phone? How did they get in there?" "Ed, call the police. There are 15,000 strangers in my telephone." The chat exploded with comments like, "Protect Barbara at all costs," and "Someone give this woman her own show," while Barbara continued to stare at the screen with the expression of someone who had just realized that her quiet Tuesday afternoon had somehow become a public spectacle. Ed, meanwhile, had become intoxicated by the idea of viral fame. His smartwatch was now pinging constantly with notifications, alerts, and updates that he didn't understand but interpreted as signs of their impending celebrity status. "Barb, we need to capitalize on this momentum," he announced, using business terminology he'd picked up from watching daytime television. "My watch says we need to engage with our audience and create compelling content. We should do a dance." The suggestion of dancing caused Barbara to look at Ed as if he had suggested they take up base jumping or competitive alligator wrestling. "I'm not dancing for 15,000 strangers, Ed Garrison. I don't even dance for family members at weddings." But Ed was already moving, apparently interpreting the background music from Mildred's Barnyard app as their unofficial soundtrack. His version of dancing looked like a combination of Tai Chi, traffic directing, and possibly some sort of seizure, but the TikTok audience was eating it up. The comments were now a blur of fire emojis and requests for more content. Ashley, realizing that she had somehow lost complete control of her smartphone literacy class, decided to lean into the chaos. "Okay, everyone, let's help Barbara and Ed create their first viral video," she announced to the room, which caused a chain reaction of confusion, excitement, and what could only be described as geriatric pandemonium. Mildred turned up the volume on her Barnyard app, providing what she generously called background music. Another resident, Harold, who had been quietly trying to figure out how to change his wallpaper, accidentally activated his phone's flashlight and began waving it around like he was directing air traffic. The woman in the corner, Dorothy, had somehow managed to order 17 cases of cat food through voice command and was now arguing with her phone about canceling the order, which was providing an excellent comedy soundtrack of "Cancel Order. Cancel Order. No, I don't want to speak to customer service." It was at this moment that Barbara made a critical error in judgment, or perhaps the best decision of her technological career, depending on your perspective. Mishearing Ashley's shouted instruction to work it as twerk it, a word Barbara had never heard but assumed was some sort of dance terminology, she launched into what can only be described as the most enthusiastic interpretation of 1980s aerobics ever captured on social media. Her neon pink tracksuit, which had been a questionable fashion choice to begin with, now became the star of the show as Barbara began a routine that involved arm circles, knee lifts, and what appeared to be her personal interpretation of the electric slide mixed with water aerobics and possibly some moves she'd learned from a Richard Simmons VHS tape circa 1985. "We're trending, Barb. We're trending," Ed shouted over the chaos, consulting his smartwatch as if it were an oracle of social media wisdom. The viewer count had now exceeded 50,000, and the hashtag #SeniorCenterChaos was climbing the trending charts alongside #ConfusedGrandma and #EdandBarbShow. Ed, inspired by Barbara's commitment to the performance, began his own interpretive dance routine, which looked like a cross between the Macarena and someone trying to explain airplane safety procedures while standing on hot coals. His smartwatch was now beeping so frequently it sounded like a smoke detector with a dying battery, but Ed interpreted each beep as applause from the digital universe. The other residents, caught up in the moment and perhaps experiencing the most excitement they'd had since the Great Bingo scandal of 2019, began joining in. Harold continued his air traffic control routine with a phone flashlight. Mildred had found the volume controls on her Barnyard app and was now conducting a symphony of farm animal sounds. And Dorothy had given up on canceling her cat food order and was now arguing with Siri about the weather forecast for next Tuesday. The room had transformed from a quiet educational setting into what appeared to be the world's most chaotic senior center dance party. Ashley, realizing that she was witnessing either the complete failure of her lesson plan or the birth of viral internet gold, began filming the chaos with her own phone, live streaming to her Instagram account with the caption, "When your smartphone class becomes a TikTok sensation." The comments were now coming in so fast they were just a blur of emojis, exclamation points, and requests for merchandise. Someone had already created a remix of Mildred's farm animal sounds set to a hip-hop beat, and another viewer was offering to manage Barbara and Ed's influencer career. And then, in a moment that would go down in Sunset Manor history as either the Great Connection Crisis or the day the internet died, their collective viral stardom crashed the senior center's Wi-Fi network. The router, which was approximately as old as some of the residents and had never been designed to handle the digital equivalent of a flash mob, simply gave up. The live stream froze on a frame of Barbara mid-arm circle, her face caught in an expression of pure, joyful confusion, while Ed was captured in what appeared to be an attempt to high-five the ceiling. The viewer count stopped climbing, the comments stopped flowing, and suddenly the room was filled with the blessed silence of technological failure. "Did we break the internet?" Barbara asked, looking at her now frozen phone screen with a mixture of concern and pride. The device was still showing her own image, but it was no longer moving, no longer updating, no longer connecting her to the vast digital world that had briefly adopted her as their grandmother figure. "I think we might have broken the internet, Ed." Ed consulted his smartwatch, which was now displaying a message that said "no network connection" in letters large enough for him to read without his glasses. "According to my watch, we've either broken the internet or achieved what it calls peak performance," he announced with the confidence of someone who had no idea what he was talking about but enjoyed saying technical-sounding phrases. "I think this means we won." In the silence that followed the great Wi-Fi crash, something magical happened. The residents of Sunset Manor, still buzzing with the adrenaline of their unexpected brush with internet fame, began talking to each other. Not about their medications, or their children's divorces, or whether the dining hall was serving mystery meat again, but about hashtags and viewer counts and the surreal experience of accidentally becoming social media sensations. Barbara, still in her neon tracksuit, found herself surrounded by fellow residents who wanted to hear about what it felt like to be trending, a word she still didn't fully understand but had decided she liked the sound of. "You know," said Mildred, finally managing to turn off her Barnyard Symphony, "that was the most fun I've had since my Harold passed. He would have loved to see me conducting a cow orchestra for the internet." The comments sparked a round of stories about spouses and friends who would have been amused, amazed, or appalled by their digital adventure, and for the first time in months, the community room filled with laughter instead of complaints about the temperature or the quality of the afternoon entertainment. Ed discovered that his smartwatch had somehow recorded the entire event as a workout, crediting him with burning 847 calories, achieving his daily activity goal, and reaching a peak heart rate that his cardiologist would probably find concerning. "Look at this, Barb. According to my wrist computer, we're athletes now. It says I climbed the equivalent of 43 flights of stairs, which is impressive considering we never left the ground floor." He wore this technological validation like a Medal of Honor, already planning to show the statistics to his doctor, his son, and anyone else who would listen. By the time the IT department managed to restart the router, a process that involved unplugging it, waiting exactly 30 seconds, and plugging it back in, much to everyone's amazement, Barbara and Ed's brief moment of viral fame had already been immortalized across the internet. "According to my watch, we've either broken the internet or achieved what it calls peak performance," he announced with the confidence of someone who had no idea what he was talking about but enjoyed saying technical-sounding phrases. "I think this means we won." In the silence that followed the great Wi-Fi crash, something magical happened. The residents of Sunset Manor, still buzzing with the adrenaline of their unexpected brush with internet fame, began talking to each other. Not about their medications, or their children's divorces, or whether the dining hall was serving mystery meat again, but about hashtags and viewer counts and the surreal experience of accidentally becoming social media sensations. Barbara, still in her neon tracksuit, found herself surrounded by fellow residents who wanted to hear about what it felt like to be trending, a word she still didn't fully understand but had decided she liked the sound of. "You know," said Mildred, finally managing to turn off her Barnyard Symphony, "that was the most fun I've had since my Harold passed. He would have loved to see me conducting a cow orchestra for the internet." The comments sparked a round of stories about spouses and friends who would have been amused, amazed, or appalled by their digital adventure, and for the first time in months, the community room filled with laughter instead of complaints about the temperature or the quality of the afternoon entertainment. Ed discovered that his smartwatch had somehow recorded the entire event as a workout, crediting him with burning 847 calories, achieving his daily activity goal, and reaching a peak heart rate that his cardiologist would probably find concerning. Look at this, Barb. According to my wrist computer, we're athletes now. It says I climbed the equivalent of 43 flights of stairs, which is impressive considering we never left the ground floor. He wore this technological validation like a Medal of Honor, already planning to show the statistics to his doctor, his son, and anyone else who would listen. By the time the IT department managed to restart the router, a process that involved unplugging it, waiting exactly 30 seconds, and plugging it back in, much to everyone's amazement, Barbara and Ed's brief moment of viral fame had already been immortalized across the internet. The original TikTok video had been shared thousands of times, spawned dozens of reaction videos, and inspired a series of memes that would probably outlast the senior center's Wi-Fi router. Barbara's confused face had become the official expression of anyone trying to understand new technology, while Ed's enthusiastic dancing had been turned into a GIF that people used to celebrate small victories and unexpected joy. The most surprising part of their internet adventure, however, came the next day when Barbara's phone, her trusty old flip phone, not the smartphone that had caused all the trouble, rang with a call from her granddaughter Sarah in Portland. "Grandma, you're famous. My friends are all sharing your video. You've got like 1 million views." Sarah's excitement was infectious, and for the first time in her 72 years, Barbara found herself genuinely curious about this thing called social media. Not curious enough to get her own TikTok account, mind you, but curious enough to ask her granddaughter to explain what going viral actually meant and why people seemed to think it was a good thing. Ed, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity at the senior center. Residents who had never spoken to him before were now asking about his smartwatch, his dance moves, and his theories about the algorithm, a mysterious force that Ed had decided was probably responsible for everything from their viral success to the fact that his watch kept suggesting he drink more water. He had appointed himself as the official technology liaison for Sunset Manor and was already planning their next viral video, which he believed should involve either cooking demonstrations or reviews of daytime television programs, both of which he felt confident they could make compelling content for their demographic. 3 weeks later, Ashley's smartphone literacy class had evolved into something she hadn't planned, but was probably more valuable than anything she could have taught from a curriculum. The residents had formed their own informal support group, helping each other navigate their devices, sharing funny stories about technological mishaps, and occasionally attempting to recreate their viral moment, though never quite achieving the same perfect storm of confusion, enthusiasm, and technical difficulties that had made their original video so charming. Barbara never did learn to love her smartphone, but she did keep it charged and accessible, mainly because her granddaughter had promised to teach her how to video call during her next visit. The device sat on her nightstand like a dormant volcano, occasionally lighting up with notifications that Barbara ignored with the same determination she'd once used to avoid learning to drive a stick shift. But sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, she would pick it up and look at the frozen screenshot of her own surprised face that had somehow become the phone's wallpaper, and she would smile at the memory of the day she accidentally became famous for being confused. Ed's relationship with technology had deepened into what could only be described as a passionate friendship. His smartwatch had become his constant companion, advisor, and source of endless conversation topics. He consulted it for everything from optimal bedtimes to whether he should take the stairs or the elevator, and he developed the habit of sharing its wisdom with anyone within earshot. "My watch says it's going to rain," he would announce at breakfast, or, "According to my wrist computer, I should eat more fiber," statements that he delivered with the authority of someone receiving direct communication from the digital gods. The senior center's Wi-Fi had been upgraded after what the IT department diplomatically referred to as the incident, and Ashley had redesigned her smartphone curriculum to include a section on accidental viral fame and how to handle it, though she suspected this was a problem most people would never encounter. The new router was supposedly capable of handling much higher traffic loads, though nobody was particularly eager to test its limits again. The most lasting change, however, was in the residents themselves. Harold had mastered the flashlight function and now served as the unofficial lighting technician for evening card games. Mildred had discovered music streaming and had created what she called mood playlists for different activities, though her bingo background music playlist was dominated by what sounded like elevator music from the 1970s. Dorothy had not only figured out how to cancel unwanted orders, but had become the resident expert on voice commands, though she still argued with Siri about pronunciation and occasionally accused it of having an attitude problem. Barbara and Ed had settled into a comfortable routine of technological semi-competence. They still didn't understand most of what their devices could do, but they'd learned to embrace the confusion rather than fear it. Every Tuesday, they attended Ashley's ongoing smartphone workshops, not because they particularly wanted to learn new features, but because they enjoyed the camaraderie of shared bewilderment and the possibility that they might accidentally do something entertaining again. 6 months after their viral moment, Barbara received a letter from a marketing company offering to sponsor their brand and pay them to promote products to the 50-plus demographic. The letter was filled with terms like influencer partnerships, sponsored content, and demographic targeting, language that made Barbara feel like she was reading a foreign manual for something she'd never purchased. She called Ed over to help her decipher the correspondence, mainly because he enjoyed feeling important and she enjoyed watching him pretend to understand business terminology. "They want to pay us to be confused about things on the internet," Ed announced after studying the letter with his reading glasses and his smartwatch, as if the combination of optical and digital assistance might reveal hidden meanings. "Apparently, our authentic senior perspective is valuable to marketers trying to reach digitally curious older adults." He delivered this assessment with the authority of someone who had recently learned these phrases from a commercial but was confident in his interpretation. Barbara looked at the letter, then at Ed, then at her smartphone, which was sitting innocently on the table like it hadn't been the catalyst for this entire surreal chapter of their lives. "Ed," she said slowly, "do you think they want us to be professional confused people?" The question hung in the air with the weight of an existential crisis and the lightness of absurdist comedy, perfectly capturing the strange new world they'd accidentally stumbled into. And so, dear viewers of Silver Chuckles, our tale of accidental internet stardom comes to a close, though Barbara and Ed's adventures in the digital world continue to unfold in ways that would probably break the internet again if anyone were recording them. They never did figure out how to intentionally go viral again, despite Ed's numerous theories about optimal posting times and hashtag strategies that he'd gleaned from his smartwatch's mysterious algorithm suggestions. The last time I checked, Barbara was still using her flip phone for actual phone calls, and her smartphone primarily as an expensive flashlight and occasional conversation starter. Ed had embraced his role as Sunset Manor's unofficial technology evangelist, though his advice was often more enthusiastic than accurate, and his smartwatch continued to provide him with daily goals, health insights, and reminders that he interpreted with the creativity of a fortune cookie philosopher. Their TikTok video still surfaces occasionally in compilations of wholesome internet moments and seniors being adorable, earning them new fans who discover their brief moment of viral fame and wonder whatever happened to the confused grandmother and her dancing friend. The answer, as with most internet sensations, is both simpler and more complex than you might expect. They return to their regular lives, but with a shared experience that proved sometimes the best adventures are the ones you never planned for, never fully understood, and couldn't recreate if you tried. Barbara never did learn what twerking actually meant, and frankly, we're all probably better off that way. Ed continues to believe that trending is something you do on purpose, and his confidence in this belief has inspired several other residents to attempt their own viral moments, none of which have been quite as successful, but all of which have provided excellent entertainment for Tuesday afternoon smartphone classes. And somewhere in the vast digital universe, their moment of pure, unfiltered confusion continues to bring joy to people who need a reminder that it's perfectly okay to not understand everything, that enthusiasm can triumph over expertise, and that sometimes the most authentic content is created by people who have absolutely no idea they're creating content at all. The moral of our story, if there's one, might be this. In a world that often feels too complicated, too fast, and too digital, there's something deeply reassuring about two people in their 70s accidentally becoming internet famous, simply by being themselves. Whether that's a commentary on our society, our technology, or just the universal appeal of watching someone else be more confused than we are, I'll leave that for you to decide. Until next time, this has been Silver Chuckles, where we've learned that going viral is less about knowing what you're doing and more about doing it with enough enthusiasm that people can't help but watch. Keep laughing, keep learning, and remember, if Barbara and Ed can accidentally conquer the internet, anything is possible.